Wow, really can't see anybody here. Okay, so we're talking today a little bit about Pebble. Um, this is the, does this move? Okay, I'm Itai. I'm the head of product for Pebble. With me here is my collaboration partner, Liron, head of design. And for people that, wait, our Twitter handles, if anybody needs them. For people that don't know anything about Pebble, let me run you through the brief history of Pebble. So in 2012, Pebble broke every crowdfunding record, basically defined crowdfunding by raising $10 million, an unheard of amount at that time, and basically launched the smartwatch revolution. 3 years later, we came back to Kickstarter with our new product, Pebble Time, and as you can see, it went well. The internet loves us. And I'm here to tell a little bit of the story of how we came up with this product and how in general we work. How do we work in an environment and an industry situation where there's obviously big fruit companies out to get us? And we have to be very precise about what we do. We're going to talk a lot today about limitations. What do they mean? Are they bad? We're going to talk about qualities. How do we find them? How do we define them? How do we use them? And how those two things drive focus. And if you're lucky and you did those two things and you are focused, what are some unexpected benefits that come out of it? So the first story, there are going to be two stories today. The first story is a product story. I'm head of product. So usually, so anybody here that is trying to build a smart device, somebody's going to ask you, what do you mean by smart? What's a smart device? And mostly, you take an old form factor, slap a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or GSM chip on it, and call it a day. It's smart. Done. If you're really good and you want to convince your VC you know what you're doing, you're going to say, oh, it runs apps. That's going to be your key. Now, this is where we start hitting limitations, because anybody that is really good with hardware can do the first two, right? We're going to have, we're going to pick an old form factor, whatever, smart mattress. We're going to put a Bluetooth chip in it, and it's going to run an iOS app on the phone. The hard part starts with the apps, because you need to build an app ecosystem, and when you're not Apple or Google, that's a very, very, very hard thing to do. And that's a limitation that we have to acknowledge that we have. So the question really is, does smartwatch really mean a watch with apps? Is this where we are? And Pebble, I'm talking to you from a point where we right now have an app store with 7,000 apps. It's probably going to be true for the next few days. It's more than Apple. I don't expect that specifically to like that statistic to remain. But is this really the right way for a company of our size and our means? Is there another way where we can win? So before we talk more about apps, this is an application. People that were working in the 90s might remember it. It's the longer word. It has a few things after the apps, application. They were big. There were 100 different ways of launching them from your Windows PC. They were complicated, that did many, many things. So I'm running you through the history of apps. Then our good friends at Apple invented apps. They're the first company to figure out this idea of the round rect that launches you into a completely new experience. And they figured that what makes the difference is that it's small. The experience is smaller than an application. That's why they didn't call it an application. There were mobile applications before, they just weren't apps. So they told all of us, the builders, the makers, the programmers of the world, hey, make less functionality. It's a small screen. That was very, very smart, and it worked. And then we started speculating, because we love speculating about what Apple does. And somebody said, hey, they're going to build an iPhone mini. So people thought it's going to look like this. And there were all these jokes about how they're going to rearrange their launcher. And somebody even thought about a iPhone shuffle. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. And I see people laughing now because it makes no sense, right? Why would I have a launcher in such a small device? And if I launch an app, it's going to be too small to provide any meaningful functionality. So everybody laughed. It was funny. Fast forward, we're doing what we said we're not going to do. Both us and Apple have a launcher. We have a menu where you go, you fumble through the menu, you find the app you wanted, you click on it, you get a really small amount of information. It's not the information you wanted. You're going to go look for another place in the app. You're going to dive in it. You're going to pull out your phone from your pocket. That's what you're going to do. You're not going to use it. So that's where we are, and that's our limitation. That's screen size and the fact that it's going to be really hard to convince developers to build apps is a problem if you define your product as a watch with apps. So that's where we come to this idea of, hey, we're not in the 90s. APIs are all around us. There's OAuth. There's functionality that lives on the web. Do we need to dream of a world where the only way to extend a product is through apps? Is the menu the only way? This is why people invented menus, for having being able to order something. It's big, it has all these options. It means that I don't know if I want a sandwich, or if it's a breakfast, or it's a dessert, or what's up. But it turns out that on a watch, I know a lot more. So I want to run you through some of the ideas of Pebble Time and how it works. So this would be a watch with apps. You have a big watch, and it has all these cool apps around it. So what we decided to do is take away the app parts. There are no apps. Or there are apps, but they don't matter. What we care about and what you as users care about is the information. We want to take the information outside of the app, and we'll do with it what needs to be done. We'll present it the right way to the user at the right time. You as a developer, don't worry about it. And for people here that are builders, you can do the same thing for your product. And since this is a watch, it really does make sense to not put it in a menu, but put it on a timeline. So if I want to see that tweet I missed, I just go to the past. Simple. When did I wake up? Oh, it's 7. That Instagram picture somebody took, I can go and find it. It's really easy. Is it going to rain? Well, apparently it is in an hour. There's a Cavs game today. It's there. I'll get live sports. My flight out of Vegas is still here, and the market closes in Europe. I'll get the update. And the fun part about dividing it this way is that it becomes really trivial to access the information. No more fumbling through a menu. Where is it? Where did it go? I click it. I need to click another thing. I click the information I want. It's contextual, but it's not a mystery how it got there. It's not like Google Now, where you never know why you have a card or not. It's there because it's 2 o'clock. It's there because you have a meeting at 3. And it's extensible. Anybody can build these pins. We call them pins. Anybody can build them. And we have many, many pins that none of these we've built. So for example, my flight today, how does it work? So I can describe a flight. This is not real code. But it has a start time and end time, a reminder. These are the things that basically position it on a timeline. And if the watch goes forward in time, we'll be able to find it. The watch will know when the reminder needs to pop up. But it has other information. It has which airport are you flying from, to which airport, what's the gate. And I can provide actions. They don't live on the watch. They're just HTTP calls, but like check in and get QR code. None of this requires new UI from the developer. So remember I talked about some of the unexpected benefits of focusing? So we accepted our limitations. We accepted that apps are going to be very hard for us. We had an insight, several, about the state of technology and the fact that this is a watch. And we focused on those. And let me show you what happened. This is not something we intended to do when we started. This is not, I won't pretend of like, oh, we knew this is where it's going to end. So very much like a mobile phone or, yeah, mobile phone. They both have, like iPhone has an M7 or an M8, just like that chip that records what you do. So we have something similar, and we know that you were asleep, and then you were driving, and then you were sitting. Just sounds like any other day. But let's start layering information from some of the other pins. Turns out that my location timeline can tell me I was home, and then I was flying, and then I got to Las Vegas. So now it doesn't look anymore like a very normal day. Interesting. But remember that we had weather? That weather app, all of a sudden, or weather pin, or weather data source, as we call them, now knows to give me the morning weather for Palo Alto, and it turns out it can give me the evening weather for Las Vegas before I even flew there. So that's all of a sudden a way our apps couldn't have communicated before, and now our data sources can communicate. So again, this idea of focus has allowed us to discover something new, a benefit, something that was there, but I don't think we would have discovered it if we were just blindly going and saying, you know what, we're gonna build an app ecosystem because we can. The other thing I want to leave you with before I hand it off to my colleague here, Liron, is this idea that if you're building a smart product, yes, you want it to be able to be extended by the community and other developers, but that does not mean you have to diffuse your focus. If you're building, what did I see? I saw a mattress for yoga, a smart mattress for yoga. That's cool. Can you imagine how worse it would be with apps? I have to go fumble and find the app I want to launch. There's a lot of these products that can be extended, but not through apps. So dig deep into what this product that you're building is about and figure out a way to extend it but not diffuse it. Another story now, more about design from Liron.
How does it go? Oh, hello. Hi. So I want to go through this from a design perspective. Basically, the same ideas remain. Everybody's going to tell you that if you have a limitation, please accept the limitation and work with it. But the question is, how do you do it? From which perspective? And I found out that the best way that actually I do it is if I take hardware and work with it as if it was a material, like a real material in the world, glass, plastic, and whatever. If you think about it that way, things start to make a little bit more sense. Plastic or gold, for example, plastic is not inherently cheap. Gold is not inherently rich. It's all contextual. And the interesting part starts when you actually create the context through the limitations of the material that makes it shine. So after you go on and accept the limitation and start working with them and discovering what it is, you might find that there's a few hidden gems in the hardware. And what I'm talking about now is like, let's call it low-end or lo-fi hardware. You might find that there's like unexpected things that these things do. For example, the main limitations that we had was the screen resolution, screen size. The screen is a very particular screen. It's e-paper, low resolution, about 144 pixels on 168. But it turned out that the fact that it's so, what's the word I'm looking for? Unassuming. And people also equate this screen with technologies that they know from the past, from the 80s, or even e-ink, which is a different kind of paper screen that you'd see on, for example, the Kindle. People have expectations, and we can work with these expectations to create surprising moments. And all that together will create a focused experience, and a focused product. If you look at it from this perspective, you start to understand that basically the limitations are quantitative. You can describe them in numbers, the amount of pixels on the screen, or whatever, and they're technical. The qualitative aspect is the interesting part, and I think most times, people forget to actually, or don't have the right people in the company to actually assess what is the quality of the material they're working with and how to work with it. So they're lacking insightful moments. And it breaks this equation where at the end of it, you don't have an idiosyncratic focused product. You have basically, if you look at this, take the two of the others from the equation, you just have, instead of an autonomous product in the world, you have this, where this graph is defined by the topmost, the alpha player, defines the standard, and you're kind of like playing his game with his standards, and that's what defines you. Adding the other parts to the equation, the one about that looks for the gems, the qualitative, insightful part, will allow you to actually break free of this. This is the screen that we've been working with. I really hated the screen. Really hated this screen when I started. I'm a visual designer. I started out as a visual designer. I value, my craft a lot. And starting out with this screen, it was very problematic. The slow res has 64 colors in it, not really, a lot to work with. Because it's 64 colors, anti-aliasing, for example, doesn't work really good on it. It looks like as if it should work, but it doesn't. It's jaggy. And I hated it so much, I'm going to show you this. This is actually how I worked on this device for the first 2 months, pathetically. It's just a bezel, of the watch. I just slapped it to a retina display and started working with it to see what I can do with it. But it didn't take me long to actually understand that this was kind of like delusional, and I had to start accepting the limitation of the screen and start working with them. So the benefit of this screen, why we chose it, is very simple. It's a great screen for this device. It has what we consider to be Pebble's main objectives when building this device. Battery life is very long. You don't have to actually take it off your wrist every 16, 18 hours or less to charge it. It's daylight visible. It has color, as I said. And the bezel size, I know it's surprising to you, but considering other screens of the same in the same category, the bezel size is very small. So the limits were small dimensions and low resolutions and the 64 colors. if we chose not to work with these limits, there's two ways to do it. One is to ignore it. Say, you know what, we're all used to, the Apple standard thing, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to create icons, or we can, create UI that looks like an Apple UI, and then we're going to slap it on the screen, and it's going to look horrible. And that's it. And the other one is just run blindly with the limitations without any insights, right? And then you're going to look like, I don't know, maybe a Casio. This is the same screen that we actually have on the Pebble time, but a different manufacturer. This is basically taking, the Casio approach, right? And this is how it looks. Not very appetizing. And this is the other way around, where you have a beautiful 3D render of, this thing with the same screen. But this is the reality of how it looks, which is horrific. So assess the qualities. How do you do that? Two things. One is gem mining, as I said. And when you're gem mining, you're actually looking at the material, the hardware, and you're trying to find one thing that actually makes it great, or more, and elevate it up. The second thing is called sort of alchemy. Take things that are actually problematic and turn them into gold, right? So basically shift around your perspective. The main saving grace for this device, for me, was when I experienced the fact that it can run in 30 frames per second. It was a surprise moment for me, right? Because you don't expect this device, this little thing with a screen that looks like a Kindle screen, which refreshes basically, has a 3 to 4 frames per second refresh rate. You don't expect it to actually act like that, but it does. And the question was, how can we amplify that surprise moment? How can we actually take that and build on it? So this is how it looked on the old Pebble. This is animation on a loop, right? This is basically why I'm calling it mining gems, because nobody actually understood what can be done with it. And then we said, okay, let's take just a simple shape. And I'm using simple shapes here without any curves even, because that's another limitation. Because of the color, we didn't want to start having problems with anti-aliasing and jaggies. We said, okay, fuck it. Sorry. We're gonna use just straight lines to create our icons. It's gonna be very, very simple. And the contrast will be visible when this thing actually moves. And this is how it looks, right? So, thank you. So this is an interesting moment because you didn't expect this simple thing to act with such an amount of personality. And you don't need much as an animator as well. And if there's animators in the crowd, you should know this. You don't need a lot to evoke emotion out of a moving object. To create something that is inanimate, give it life and personality. You don't need a lot. And that proves it. The next thing that's the opposite was a problem that we have with the screen. It had this weird rolling shutter effect. I don't know if you know what rolling shutter is. It's not really rolling shutter on our screen, but in cameras, basically, on CMOS chip, its refresh rate is too slow for specific cases where you move the camera really fast. And what happens is that it renders frames, like I'm moving the camera really fast, renders frames, not as a whole, sorry, but as lines. And you get this weird stretch. It's a weird stretchy effect. We had the same problem, not because of a CMOS chip, but this is how it looked. This is slow motion, this is slow down. This is an artifact. And most times what people would do would be basically either just one thing, either ignore it, or try to hide it somehow. Don't do animation. Don't do animation. We have this rolling shutter thing. Let's not do it because it really makes things look bad. We actually thought, wait a minute, it's actually super, super cool. What if everything on this device actually moved like that? And so I'm going to show you a few tests. These are actual tests from our process. What happens if everything stretches like that? And because the icons themselves are vector icons, and we have 30 frames per second, we can actually achieve that, right? And here's a basic, really early version of the timeline. And this is the latest we have. The next problem is the 64 color problem. How can you take that and make that into something good? How can you own it? We looked back, and turns out that there's a lot of things that don't use a lot of color. Here's a good example. So instead of, trying to be something that we're not, let's own it and use this style. And so this thing kind of evolved. This is how things look on our watch. And then we developed a whole graphic language around it that utilizes the limitations that we had and works with them. Next problem was navigation and orientation. Itai kind of talked about it. The problem was that the screen is too small. Small screen means you don't have a lot of information that you can have on that thing. You need to, basically, you'll see it on every device, even in the Apple Watch. You're swiping it constantly to read things, to read. So there's a problem with navigation there that at some point you lose your sense of orientation. And then we said, okay, what if instead of moving in space, in X, Y, we're actually morphing into screens? And building upon, the earlier examples that I showed you, we actually made that possible, basically doing something like this. Every screen starts from a dot and ends in a dot. And not only every screen, also icons. So here's an icon. And this icon can actually transform itself into a different icon. So you can imagine how, incoming call has one icon, and instead of just changing it, some in a translational way on position or something like that, or rotation, basically what we're doing here is actually manipulating the points and morphing it. Here's how it looks. Right? And all our screens, it's not only icons work like that, all our screens actually work like that. And then the final realization was that working with lo-fi is not such a bad thing. Lo-fi actually equates to warmth, and it's something that you actually want to have when you're connecting with people, with a device. Warm tech is something that we, a phrase that we actually used internally to denote this specific feeling that you get from stuff like this, or this, or this, or this. It's warm because you remember it. If you're, old like me, you remember using it. And you remember how, there's memories involved and emotion. It's not a new thing completely. It's not foreign to you. And this whole thing isn't a new idea, lo-fi. Not using a lot of means to achieve a goal. You have this weird band, the Stadium Monster. And you have this guy who eventually turned into a stadium monster, but began his life, very, very, very small. And you don't need a lot to actually convey what you need to convey. And the benefits of doing that, which I'll leave you with, is Bob Dylan has a focused use case. You know, it does a few things, but it does them really, really well. He breaks the mold, or broke the mold at the time, inventing new standards rather than following them. And some people thought his voice was horrific. You know, it's ugly, it's new. It was ugly because it was new. So you will meet a lot of it. If you're starting to break the mold, people are going to call it ugly or going to call it weird. It's idiosyncratic. Nobody can steal it from you. Nobody can say that you stole it from someone. It's easy to recognize, but it's very, very, very hard to copy. People are going to know where this came from. It's a very, very good lesson for branding as well. And it builds you an army of followers, of zealots, because they get you if you have a conversation with them. You know, they understand what you're trying to tell them, what you're referencing. You know, you're touching their memories, basically. If they understand that, they get it, then, you know, they'll become converts and will start converting other people. And it's hard to stay apathetic when you're watching something like that. You either hate it or you really, really, really love it. And that's something that you really, really want in product. Thanks.